What's going on, folks? Ted from Nerd Immersion here, and it's leak time, my friends. I received some exclusive information from someone who has their hands on a copy of Mordenkainen's Monsters of the Multiverse. Now, I can't, for everyone's safety, disclose who this person is or tell you how they managed to acquire a copy of said book, but I can tell you I've had conversations and I have some screenshots of different things contained within the book. Now, I will tell you that these screenshots are from a phone, pictures from a phone, and for whatever reason, when downloaded to my computer, the aspect ratio is just garbage. So I will show you them on the screen as best I can, but I'll most likely have to read them off of my phone because I can see them better in that aspect. But long story short, a couple of interesting things. There were significant changes to several races, including what seems to be, although again, I don't have information for every single race. I have a portion of them, but sunlight sensitivity seems to have been completely removed from any race that has sunlight sensitivity. We also do have the full list of playable races contained within this book, and some quality of life changes that I anticipated coming in 2024, arriving later this month with the unveiling of the new book. So, to start, why don't we take a look at this? Now, again, I know this is very small and I could zoom it in, but it's not gonna really get much cleaner for you. It'll get about like that. But anyway, this is the disclaimer from the front of the book. So it says, we asked the wizard Mordenkainen to write a humorous disclaimer for this book. We received this response. The day I start writing frivolous disclaimers for game manuals is the day I retire from wizardry and abandon all self-respect. Mordenkainen's rival wizard Tasha apparently interpreted our request and sent us this note. Mordenkainen lost his sense of humor somewhere between the city of Greyhawk and the astral plane. Keep your chin up, my dearest ones. The multiverse is filled with horrors, many of which are detailed in this book. Marshal your laughter and a few good spells. If we are going to be devoured, better to face the darkness with a smile. So if we go ahead and zoom ourselves all the way out, we can go ahead and we can go to the next page. Now this is the table of contents for the book. Now you have pictures of all of the table of contents. I'm not really too heavily focused on the bestiary per se. I'm more interested on Chapter 1, which is called Fantastical Races, okay? Which we can see that list there. It's kind of fuzzy. I'll zoom it in a little bit more for you and see if I can get it. I can't really, yeah, there we go. It is Aarakocra, Azamar, Bugbear, Centaur, Changeling, Deep Gnome, Duergar, Eladrin, which is in here as by itself, so I don't know if that means it is its own standalone race, or it's just, you know, here as a specific, but so is Shatterkai, so I assume they're there as sub-races of elves. Fairy, which is interesting because Fairy was just printed in, literally just printed in Wild Beyond the Witchlight. But anyway, Fairy, Furbog, all four Genasi, Githyanki, Githzerai, Goblin, Goliath, Harengon, Hobgoblin, Kenku, Kobold, Lizard Folk, Minotaur, Orc, Satyr, Sea Elf, Shatterkai, Shifter, Tabaxi, Tortle, Triton, and Yuan Ti. Now, again, what I thought is interesting is I was under the impression that Shifter was very specific to Eberron, but what's interesting is, drop a notebook, Warforged is not on this list. But it's nice to see the Genasi reprinted, and yes, they did get pretty substantial changes to the Genasi, which is exciting to see. Again, I haven't seen everything in there. I was just received a sample, but we'll go ahead and take a look at what I'm able to show you here. So we'll go to the next. This is the rest of the table of contents. I'm not too worried about that. But this one is what we kind of expected. Creating your character, now they all have this. So all of the ability scores that were tied to those races previously have been nullified, and following in the footsteps of Tasha's Cauldron of Everything, this is now what they all have applied to them. You can increase your one ability score by 2 and another one by 1, or 3 different ability scores by 1, which is something that Triton originally had. Now you can choose the option +2 +1 or +1 +1 +1 for any of those races that I just listed. I also did not count them, but we'll have to see. And then again, you get a language typically common in another language. Work with your DM to figure that out. So first up, we have the Deep Gnome, which also received significant changes. Again, that's horribly blurry, and I'm sure you definitely can't read that, but I will do my best to iterate it to you. You are humanoid. You are also considered a gnome for... Oh, this is an interesting qualifier, too. You are also considered gnome for any prerequisite of effect that requires you to be a gnome. You are small size. Your walking speed is 30 feet. Now, I believe Svirfneblin, which is what a deep gnome is called, were originally 25 feet. So we might have been removing the penalties for small-sized races completely, and Svirfneblin now have a 30-foot movement speed. You have dark vision to 120 feet. You now have an ability called Gift of the Svirfneblin. Now, if you recall, there was a racial feat that existed that was originally found in the books where they were published called Svirfneblin Magic, which was a feat that only Svirfneblin could take. They have since embedded that Svirfneblin Magic feat into this racial ability called Gift of the Svirfneblin. Starting at 3rd level, you can cast the Disguise Self spell with this trait. Starting at 5th level, you can also cast the Non-Detection spell with it, without requiring a material component. Once you cast either of these spells with this trait, you can't cast that spell again until you finish a long rest. And once again, the quality of life has been applied to that, and the races in this book. You can also cast these spells using spell slots you have of the appropriate level. You choose Intelligence, Wisdom, or Charisma for casting that spell when you choose the race. You also still get Gnomish Magic Resistance, which is advantage on Intelligence, Wisdom, and Charisma saving throws against spells. That transferred over. And they now have Svirfneblin Camouflage, which I believe is a slight nerf to the original one, which was advantage on dexterity stealth checks while in an area of rocky terrain. That has been changed to when you make a dexterity stealth check, you can make that check with advantage. You can use this trait a number of times equal to your proficiency bonus and get it back on a long rest. So I lied. I'm going to consider that to be an improvement overall. I don't recall. I believe Svirfneblin always had 120-foot dark vision. You do now have that increase of a 30-foot movement speed. They list it specifically, again, that it is a humanoid, but you're considered gnome. I'm going to guess that the same thing has been applied to Eladrin as well as Shatterkai and Sea Elf as well. I imagine they're similar things. And then again, we have this Gift of Svirfneblin trait, which is a severe improvement, giving them those abilities. Moving on, we have the Duergar, which the big thing here with the Duergar is the complete removement of sunlight sensitivity. So you are a humanoid. You are also considered, let me zoom it in a little more, even though I know you probably can't read it. You are humanoid. You are considered a dwarf for any prerequisites that require you to be a dwarf. Your size is medium. Your movement speed is 30. You have dark vision out to 120 feet. Duergar Magic. Starting at 3rd level, you can cast the Enlarge Reduce spell on yourself with this trait without requiring a material component. Starting at 5th level, you can also cast Invisibility without requiring a material component. Once you cast either of these spells with this trait, you can't cast that spell again until you finish a long rest. You can also cast these spells using spell slots you have of the appropriate level. Intelligence, Wisdom, Charisma, you choose. Dwarven Resilience, advantage on saving throws you make to avoid or end the poison condition on yourself. That's also a slight change there. To avoid or end the poison condition on yourself. In previous, it was just advantage on saving throws against poison. I think they're making that distinction, even though I feel like it does the same thing. It's just an improved wording. You also have resistance to poison damage. And then additionally, Psychic Fortitude. You have advantage on saving throws to avoid or end the charmed or stunned condition on yourself. Now that is huge because in the past, this was sort of balanced by sunlight sensitivity. Now that's changed. However, if I'm understanding this correctly, you do not gain the benefits, I think. Yeah. Okay. Interesting point of fact. If I'm understanding this correctly, this is now treated as its own standalone race. You do not get the benefits of being a dwarf. If I'm reading the way this is described to me correctly, I don't get dwarven battle training. I don't get the armor. I don't get the weapons. I don't get stone cunning. I don't get the traditional dwarven things that dwarves get. I get dwarven resilience, and I get psionic fortitude, but I don't get, I think it would be stone cunning, the proficiency in brewer's tools, mason's tools, blacksmithing tools, and then the weapon proficiencies. That has been removed. I also don't have, I think the dwarves, while they have a 25-foot movement speed, they have that thing where they don't have issues moving in heavy armor. That all appears to have been removed in favor of this becoming essentially a brand new race, which is pretty interesting. All right, moving on. We have Githyanki. There's not, as far as I could tell, there wasn't much difference with the Githyanki or the Githzerai, other than them being now officially not like Gith and then two separate sub-races. They are their own things, but they did add the quality of life features. But let's go ahead and take a look. Githyanki, you have astral knowledge. You can mystically access a reservoir of experience. Whenever you finish a long rest, you gain proficiency in a skill of your choice and with a weapon or tool of your choice from the player's handbook. These proficiencies last until your next long rest. Githyanki Psionics. You know the Mage Hand cantrip and can cast it invisibly. Starting at 3rd level, you get the Jump spell. 5th level, Misty Step. Same thing, but they added in again that language. You can also cast either of these spells with using any spell slots you have. None of these require spell components when you cast them with this trait. And you have resistance to psychic damage. That is, oh, sorry, I didn't zoom that in, but that's the Githyanki, right? So if we move on to the Githzerai, oh boy, that's so blurry. It is humanoid, movement speed 30 feet. You know the Mage Hand cantrip, it's invisible. Starting at 3rd level, you can cast Shield. 5th level, Detect Thoughts. The same kind of thing applies. Once per long rest, spell slots if you have them. Then you got Mental Discipline. Your innate psychic defenses grant you advantage on saving throws you make to avoid or end the charmed and frightened conditions on yourself, and you have resistance to psychic damage. Interesting. So they removed some of the weapon proficiencies. I believe one of the I believe it was the Githzerai had several weapon proficiencies, and I think even light armor proficiency. And that has been removed in favor of giving you, everyone has resistance to psychic damage, which I don't recall that being there originally. I probably should have looked those up ahead of time, but you guys on the internet will correct me in the comments if I'm wrong. All right, now, the moment I've been waiting for, and you've maybe been waiting for, our dear buddies, the Kobolds, do in fact receive the updates from previous things we'd received in the past, the updates from the Draconic races. So it is, you are humanoid, you are small, your walking speed is 30 feet, your dark vision goes out to 60 feet, no questions. You have Draconic Cry. As a bonus action, you let out a cry at your enemies within 10 feet. Until the start of your next turn, you and your allies have advantage on attack rolls against any of the enemies who could hear you within that 10 feet. You can use this proficiency bonus times per long rest. And you also have Kobold Legacy. Kobold's connection to the dragons can manifest in unpredictable ways. Choose one of the following legacy options for your Kobold, and you get this at level 1. You gain proficiency in one of the following skills of your choice: Arcana, Investigation, Medicine, Sleight of Hand, or Survival. Defiance, you have advantage on saving throws to avoid or end the frightened condition on yourself. Draconic Sorcery, you know one cantrip of your choice from the Sorcerer spell list. Intelligence, Wisdom, or Charisma is your spellcasting ability for that cantrip you choose when you choose this race. So it's an improvement, kind of. A lot of people will argue, and I can understand that Pack Tactics is definitely better than all of those. Personally, I think that Kobold Legacy, I think that it's fine, but I think that should have been like a tiered thing, that like at level 1 you pick one, at level 3 you pick the other, at level 5 you pick the third, so you get all of them. I realize that might be a lot of stuff, but either way. Now, let's move on to our good friends. I think the next up in here is the Genasi. Yes. So first up here is the Air Genasi. You'll notice massive changes here. Your walking speed is 35 feet, so flat out an improvement in your walking speed. Let me zoom that in. You have dark vision. All Genasi now have dark vision, which I always thought was a weird thing to only give the Fire Genasi dark vision. So that has been updated to now include all Genasi, and they all have updates to the spellcasting that they have as well. And it says, Unending Breath, you can hold your breath indefinitely. That remains the same. Lightning Resistance, you now have resistance to lightning damage, something new for the Air Genasi. And you now have Mingle with the Wind. You know the Shocking Grasp cantrip. Great, that's fantastic. At 3rd level, you can cast Featherfall with this trait. At 5th level, you can cast Levitate with this trait. And once you cast each of them, you can't do until you finish a long rest, and you can cast them with any spell slots you have of the appropriate level. They have since also removed the Constitution tie, which is interesting because that was something we often used to defend the concept of using Constitution as a casting stat. They have removed that because now you don't get a blanket bonus to Constitution to choose a Genasi. You now get Intelligence, Wisdom, or Charisma as your casting stat. You choose when you choose the class. All right, so next up we have the Earth Genasi. Walking speed of 30 feet, which is interesting that these got kind of, I think, the worst updates. Dark vision out to 60 feet. They also are still shades of gray, I believe, even for the, well, it was originally shades of red for the Fire Genasi, shades of gray. Earthwalk, you can move across difficult terrain without expending extra movement if you are using your walking speed on the ground or a floor. So it's just difficult terrain, period. I want to say it had some sort of like earth-based terrain. So it's just basically ignoring difficult terrain as long as you're on the ground. And then merge with stone. You know, the Blade Ward cantrip, you can cast it as normal, and you can also cast it as a bonus action a number of times equal to your proficiency bonus, expending all uses when you finish a long rest. Now, I think the way that that's saying is, this I didn't realize when I first read it, because I was like, they got shafted because they only got one cantrip. It's a non-attacking cantrip, which all the other ones are offensive cantrips, which I was like, it's kind of weird to give them the only defensive cantrip and give them less spells. But as a reminder, Blade Ward is until the end of your next turn. It's on yourself for 1 round. You have resistance to bludgeoning, piercing, and slashing damage dealt by, I think it's by weapon attacks. I believe that's the wording. But now you have access to it all the time, but you could choose to cast it as a bonus action, proficiency bonus times per long rest, which makes it a benefit where you're not wasting a turn, but you are casting a cantrip as a bonus action, so that does limit you to only casting cantrips as your main action, if I'm understanding that correctly. But it's a great way to have sort of a barbarian rage benefit without actually being a barbarian and still being able to cast spells. And then you also at 5th level can cast the Pass Without Trace spell once without requiring material components, once per long rest, but you can cast it using spell slots you have, Intelligence, Wisdom, or Charisma as your spellcasting mod for it. Next up, we have Fire Genasi. As we can see here, they do still have their Dark Vision, which is all that says there. Their walking speed is also 30 feet. But they changed it to be shades of gray. It is no longer shades of red for their dark vision. Not that that necessarily mattered. It was just something that made them unique. You have resistance to fire damage. You know the Produce Flame cantrip. Starting at 3rd level, you can cast the Burning Hand spell. And then starting at 5th level, you can cast Flame Blade. Both of those you can cast once per long rest. And you can cast either of those using any spell slots you have of the appropriate level. So we're adding in, I believe they originally had Produced Flame and Burning Hands. They've added Flame Blade to that. I do still think it's kind of a bummer. I guess the sort of trade-off for the not blanket having resistance all the time, like the Air, Water, and Fire Genasi have, is that the Earth Genasi now has the ability to cast Blade Ward as a bonus action. I don't think that combats always on resistance and 2 spells on top of a cantrip. But it is what it is. And then lastly, we have our Water Genasi, which was pretty strong originally, and it's only gotten better here. You still are... did I notice? Hang on, did I miss something? Is this across the board? Oh, okay, all Genasi, I missed this. All Genasi are medium or small creatures you choose when you select the race. I missed that until just now. So that's something. They can be medium or small. The Water Genasi has the walking speed. They also have a swimming speed equal to their walking speed of 30 feet. They have resistance to acid damage, which remains. They can breathe water and air with the amphibious trait, which also remains. They too have been granted dark vision, so dark vision out to 60 feet. And originally it was Shape Water, the cantrip, and Create or Destroy Water, the spell. They have since been given Acid Splash as a cantrip. And at 3rd level, they can cast Create or Destroy Water, and then at 5th level, they can cast Water Walk, giving them additional spellcasting uses and an offensive spell. And then again, as per typical, they can cast those spells once per long rest and then use any spell slots they have. Intelligence, Wisdom, or Charisma is their casting stats. Now, the thing I wanted to show you that was interesting is this is the Duergar Despot stat block. As you can see here by both of these Duergar, sunlight sensitivity still remains for the enemies. It has been removed for the player characters. And I think I think the next one that I have here is the Kobold as well. You can see the Kobold, this is a Kobold Dragonshield, also has sunlight sensitivity. So I think the thought process, well, I can agree with the thought process potentially for the Kobold player race, is that they don't have sunlight sensitivity, but they also don't have the power of pack tactics. And pack tactics can often be something to just flat out offset sunlight sensitivity by allowing you to have advantage. So you can just basically nullify sunlight sensitivity. So I could see that that could possibly be the option why they would want to have, why you'd want to get rid of it for the Kobolds. But the Duergar had sunlight sensitivity, but I guess maybe the offset for that is the fact that you don't have the base Dwarven features. But yeah, this has been a very eye-opening and interesting dive through these races. So based on what we've seen, I think we're going to see some other similar changes to things like the Eladrin and the Shatterkai. And that is interesting because a lot of people, I recall, had issues, older fans of older D&D, had an issue with the Eladrin and the Shatterkai being sub-races of elf as opposed to being their own standalone race. And what they've done with the Deep Gnome and what they've done with the Duergar seems to be what they're likely going to be doing with the Eladrin as well as the Shatterkai, and apparently possibly also the Sea Elf. Though, again, I haven't seen it. But let's go ahead and take a quick look. We've got Aarakocra, so we'll go down the list here. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. The 4 Genasi makes 14. 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, 21, 22, 23, 24, 25, 26, 27, 28, 29, 30, 31, 32, 33. So 33 fantastical races. Now, what I also think is interesting is we saw those changes to the Duergar, we saw them to the Deep Gnome, we saw the adjustments to the Genasi, as well as the Kobold and the Gith. Some of them in which they did remove features. So what has me wondering is the Hobgoblin in this book, similar to the Hobgoblin of the Feywild that we had originally from the Folk of the Feywild book that has since been adjusted, and maybe it's new now? Did the Yuan-Ti, often considered to be one of the most broken races in the game, by flat out having immunity to poison damage with no real offset, has that been adjusted to just be resistance? I'm wondering again about the Shatterkai and the Sea Elf. I'd also be curious to see things like the Fairy and the Harengon, which were just printed in Wild Beyond the Witchlight, as well as things like the Satyr, which were also recent printings. Have they received adjustments already? And have we gotten any adjustments to previous races? The one thing I did not see in here is Tiefling. And again, one of the main things from the original Mordenkainen's Tome of Foes book was that that book gave us the Tiefling subraces. But I believe Mordenkainen's Tome of Foes had the Astral Dreadnought in it, which I do know is in this book, combining Mordenkainen's Tome of Foes and Volo's Guide to Monsters into one combined book. And if that's the case, then I guess you would still need to hang on to your copy of Mordenkainen's, as it has all of the Tiefling subraces, unless the updated player's handbook that we'll receive in 2024 has those Tiefling subraces as part of it, or will they just disappear entirely in favor of some new system allowing us to choose our ability scores and then choose the cantrips that we get? So I imagine that the Goliath will be similar to, it will be exactly the same as the one we saw printed in Rime of the Frostmaiden. But I'm curious to see some things like Goblin Bugbear. Did they remain untouched? Did the Minotaur receive updates? The Minotaur is in here, I believe, as is the Centaur. So I'm curious to see where we landed on all of those and see if they received some updates. would the Minotaur now be considered a monstrosity and not a humanoid now that we know Wizards of the Coast doesn't have problem allowing us to play races that are no longer just humanoid? So, anyway, folks, I leave you with this leak. If more information makes its way across my desk, I will cover it in the future. If not, stay tuned for once I receive a full copy of the book. I will continue to cover this book and do a live stream on it and answer questions and all that good stuff. So thank you all so much for watching. And hey, if you haven't subscribed to the channel yet, I do these kinds of leaks when I receive these information and anything as best I can. So if you want to stay up to date, I would say subscribe to the channel, drive that number up. And while you could ring the notification bell, I wouldn't say no to that. A lot of my viewers tell me that joining my Discord, which there is a link in the description, is a better way to stay up to date when new videos drop. Additionally to that, I have a giveaway going on for Strixhaven. It's free to enter. Links in the description. Thank you all so much for watching, and I'll see you next time.